This research aims to bring together the concepts of feedback uptake and student feedback literacy. Feedback uptake is the purposeful use of feedback information for enhancement purposes. Student feedback literacy are the capacities to make the most of feedback opportunities of different kinds. And this research came out in the journal Studies in Higher Education a few weeks ago, and the co-authors are myself and Stephanie Young, Faculty of Education, University of Hong Kong. So in the research, we define feedback uptake as the use of previous feedback information for purposeful future actions in improving work or learning strategies. In other words, speaking to the taking action strand of feedback literacy. Now, that probably sounds relatively obvious. Of course, feedback is designed to advance student work. We want them to make use of feedback. But if we look at the literature over the last 20 years or so, we'll see that student surveys and evidence from the literature tells us that actually feedback uptake is a challenging undertaking. And there are various reasons for this. Sometimes the feedback comes too late at the end of semesters. It is read through the prism of the grade, so naturally students look at the grade first and they then may downplay the feedback. Feedback is often difficult to understand, particularly if it's in written form, and it can be hard for students to take action. And finally, there are the emotional dimensions that if feedback is upsetting, the learner may not want to engage with it. So feedback uptake and action probably more complicated than one might think at first sight. Theoretically, we framed this study at the interface of feedback research, feedback literacy research, and social constructivist learning theories. Social constructivism holds that there is a certain amount going on in our mind individually, and we co-construct new ideas, new thinking, new learning in collaboration with another. The other might be a peer, it might be a classmate, it might be the parents, it might be the teachers, and increasingly it might be generative AI. So social constructivism holds that we construct new ideas through interaction and dialogue. And in addition, that these kind of co-constructions of ideas are deeply relational, and that feedback is a relational endeavor, depending on a belief that one's interlocutor has one's own best interests at heart and is trying to support us in moving forward. The research questions are: how is teacher-written feedback interpreted and used over a 4-year period? We don't mean to privilege teacher-written feedback. There are other valuable sources of feedback, but this was the source of feedback we focused on in our research. The second research question was: how is feedback literacy developed over time? The sources of data for the research were all the teacher-written comments over a 4-year undergraduate program. How Stephanie and I interpreted these feedback comments, how we developed action plans together, and how Stephanie implemented these action plans. And Stephanie collected a reflective journal comprising about 10,000 words over the 4-year period, trying to gauge her emotions, her actions, her feelings, and her thoughts about feedback and feedback literacy. In terms of research question 1, 2 core findings were: less can be more. In other words, in academic writing, sometimes the narrower focus and the more detail is superior to covering more content. So less can be more. And the second was clarity and coherence. The need for undergraduates to write very clearly, concisely, and with a focus. In relation to feedback literacy, we uncovered from the longitudinal qualitative data set 3 core findings. Firstly, evolving appreciation of feedback. At the beginning of her undergraduate studies, Stephanie reflected that sometimes feedback could be like a reality check. It could actually tell you you're not as good as you thought you were, or you're not actually progressing so well towards your goals. And this was something that she realized she had to struggle with. Secondly, and relatedly, there is this emotional dimension to feedback, that critique is often somewhat upsetting to you, maybe particularly in your early years of undergraduate education. And thirdly, the theme of enacting action plans. Action planning in response to feedback, very important. We need to have a plan of action, but in implementing a plan of action is a further challenging undertaking. If you're familiar with the Carless and Bow 2018 Student Feedback Literacy Framework, you'll see a resonance. Appreciating feedback, managing affect, taking action. A key significance of the research is that feedback literacy is stimulated by successful experiences of feedback uptake. This appreciating feedback dimension. Again, that probably seems relatively obvious, but we know from the literature that students often don't appreciate feedback. They often find it difficult to enact. So if we are able to reconstruct processes where students have successful experiences of feedback, it makes them value and appreciate feedback more, and it makes them believe that engaging with feedback is worth the hard effort. We also have other significances. We produce a model of feedback uptake involving sense-making, action planning, and actions. We also demonstrate the longitudinal value of our data set with longitudinal evidence of sense-making, action planning, and feedback uptake. I think this paper is a bit special. I've been involved in a lot of feedback research over the last 20 years, and I think this one is interesting in terms of its longitudinal dimensions over a 4-year period, feeding into student feedback literacy development in specifically articulated areas. The reference is there. It's in Studies in Higher Education. There's also a copy on ResearchGate, but if you can't get a copy, drop me an email. Hope you enjoy the paper. Thank you very much.